There is no other animal whose death is so immense that it earned its own name, a whale fall. But why does a sinking whale trigger something closer to a meteor strike made of flesh? Why does a single carcass reshape life in the deep sea? And why are entire species dependent on these rare events vanishing without them? To understand how a dead whale becomes an ecosystem, we first have to confront how such giants die at all. A whale is one of the thickest, heaviest creatures ever to live, so massive that almost nothing can prey on it. Except for one exception, whales rarely die by attack. Instead, like ancient giants, they usually fade slowly from age disease or pure exhaustion. But for an animal that must breathe air, death comes in the most brutal way imaginable. Whales are mammals, meaning they must surface every few minutes, even the largest of them. When you weigh over 100,000 pounds, that journey from the deep to a single breath is a battle against pressure, gravity, and your own failing strength. In youth, this is effortless. Young whales rocket upward with the force of a freight train breaching clean out of the water. But age weakens muscle shifts, fat deposits, and turns every ascent into torture. Eventually, their bodies become too heavy for their strength to lift. The weight that once made them untouchable becomes the same weight that kills them. When that moment comes, something ancient begins, the first stage of a whale fall. But strangely, the fall itself does not start yet. Instead, the whale enters its first phase, the floating stage. In death, a whale does something it could never do in life. It floats. Bacteria deep inside the body begin breaking down tissue, releasing methane, carbon dioxide, and hydrogen sulfide. These gases inflate the carcass from within, turning it into a drifting island of flesh. It can stay buoyant for days, even weeks, carried by surface currents. And yes, this raises the obvious question. If whales float after death, why did they ever drown? Because when alive, whales are not naturally buoyant. Their bodies are dense with bone muscle and blubber. They must constantly swim to stay near the surface. Only after death does decomposition release the gases that lift them. But floating offers no peace. This is when the brutality begins. Sharks, seabirds, even other whales carve into the drifting carcass, tearing off slabs of meat and blubber large enough to fuel entire food chains. The whale becomes a feast long before it ever sinks. Eventually, the great balloon deflates. The gases seep out. The weight returns. And slowly, the ocean begins to reclaim what it gave. Piece by piece, the whale starts to sink. This is the moment the whale fall truly begins. The sinking of a whale is slow, almost ceremonial. Depending on its size and the depth below the fall can take hours. A whale dropping through 3,000 meters of water at roughly 30 meters per minute needs around an hour and 40 minutes to reach the sea floor. Imagine you are a deep-sea fish and the largest mass you have ever seen drifts down from the darkness above, silent and unstoppable. When it finally touches the ocean floor, the third stage begins, the scavenger stage. Within hours, the abyss awakens. Hagfish, sleeper sharks, crabs, and arthropods swarm the carcass, tearing into it with relentless precision. These scavengers can strip hundreds of pounds of flesh in a single day. Over the next months, sometimes years, they consume up to 90% of the whale's biomass. All that remains are bones, connective tissues, and the oily residue soaking deep into the sediment. In a world where food is scarce and darkness offers little mercy, this is a jackpot beyond imagination. A whale fall is a feast large enough to reshape the lives of everything nearby. What comes next is stranger still. Once the larger scavengers have taken their share, the whale fall enters a quieter but no less important phase, the enrichment opportunist stage. Worms, crustaceans, and dense bacterial mats now move in, thriving on what remains embedded in the sediment around the bones. They burrow through the seafloor, feeding on the oily residue and the decaying tissue left deep in the mud. If this entire process occurred at the surface, the smell would be unbearable. Tons of decomposing meat fats, sulfur, and ammonia would fill the air with a stench of rotten eggs mixed with decay. But here in the frozen dark, these compounds become fuel. Life in the deep learns to turn rot into energy. This stage can last for years, sometimes decades, as the whale's remains slowly reshape the surrounding environment. What began as a single corpse now transforms into a living island in the middle of the abyss. Some creatures found here exist nowhere else on Earth. Among them, the most iconic are the bone-eating worms known as osedacs. They have no mouths, no stomachs. Instead, they send root-like tendrils into the whale's bones, relying on symbiotic bacteria to break down the fats within. Around them gather strange clams, mussels, and amphipods that feed on the chemical soup leaking out of the bones. Entire life forms depend on a creature that has already died. And yet the transformation is not finished. By now, every trace of flesh is gone. What remains are bones loaded with lipids waiting for the last specialists of the deep. This is when the final feeding stage begins. Specialized microbes settle onto the skeleton, breaking down the fats inside the bones and releasing hydrogen sulfide. For most animals, this gas is lethal, but for the deep sea, it is fuel. It powers an entire miniature ecosystem, one that mirrors the chemistry of a hydrothermal vent, not driven by magma or sunlight, but by the lingering energy inside a single dead whale. Giant tube worms, mussels, and clams gather living off the bacteria that feed on the bones' released sulfides. This stage can endure for decades, even a century. A whale that died long before anyone alive was born may still be sustaining new life far below. It is both beautiful and grotesque, a reminder that in the ocean, death does not end anything. It simply changes its form. Yet even this cannot last forever. Eventually, the sulfides run dry. The bacteria vanish. The remaining structure becomes a hollow, brittle skeleton buried slowly into the sediment. But the story is not over. Even when the whale's energy is gone, its bones still hold purpose. Over time, coral, sponges, and anemones begin to anchor themselves to the remaining structure. The skeleton becomes a frame, turning what was once a rotting carcass into a kind of deep-sea reef. Tiny fish and invertebrates drift in, hiding among the ribs and vertebrae as if the bones were ancient architecture left behind by a vanished world. They are no longer feeding on the whale, but using its body one final time for shelter and stability. A reef built from death, supporting life in the emptiest place on Earth. Eventually, even this stage fades. Currents scatter the last atoms of the whale into the ocean, but it can take nearly a century for the final traces to disappear. Most whale falls follow this exact sequence, from floating island to sinking meteor, from feast to chemical engine, from skeleton to reef, until nothing recognizable remains. But that raises the question, how often do these ecosystem-creating events actually occur? For a brief moment in history, whale falls were far more common than they are today. During the peak of industrial whaling in the 19th and 20th centuries, thousands of whales were killed every year. After being stripped for oil and blubber, many carcasses or large portions of them were dumped back into the sea. Each one of these bodies, natural or not, created a deep-sea ecosystem. A single whale fall can support life for decades, so every lost whale sent a cascade of energy into the abyss. In a twisted way, whaling fed the deep sea, even as it devastated whale populations at the surface. But this imbalance could not continue. As whales were pushed toward near extinction, fewer carcasses reached the ocean floor. And when the number of whale falls collapsed, so did the ecosystems built on them. Species that depended on a steady rhythm of dying whales suddenly had nothing to eat. Entire communities flickered out in the dark. Today, whale numbers remain lower than their historical peak, which means fewer whale falls and fewer deep-sea cities rising from the dead. But human activity still creates them in other ways. Beyond old age deaths and historical whale falls can start in several brutal ways. Ship strikes are one of the most common. A whale near the surface stands no chance against a vessel weighing tens of millions of pounds. Even a glancing impact from a steel hull can kill instantly, sending the body into the whale fall cycle. Killer whales also contribute. Working in coordinated pods, they can bring down adult whales, though calves are their more frequent targets. But because this is part of natural predation, they are not a true threat to whale populations. Then there are stranding events. A stranded whale seems like the opposite of something that could sink, yet it can. When whales beach themselves due to illness, sonar disorientation, or following another too close to shore, their own weight crushes their organs. The sun heats the body, decomposition accelerates, and gases build up just as they would in the open ocean. If the tide rises high enough, the inflated carcass can float again, drifting back to sea and entering the whale fall process. This buildup of gas is also what causes the infamous exploding whale incidents. If the body isn't moved quickly, methane, sulfur, and decay fluids pressurize beneath the skin until the carcass bursts. It is gruesome but entirely natural. No matter how it begins, any large whale that dies and sinks becomes an instant ecosystem. But how many of these silent cities lie on the ocean floor? The truth is, we have almost no idea how many whale falls are scattered across the abyss. The ocean floor is simply too vast, too deep, too unexplored for us to ever count them all. It could be hundreds or thousands. Based on how many whales die each year, the deep sea is likely dotted with these ready-made ecosystems, each one thriving quietly in the dark. Ironically, the most vibrant places at the bottom of the ocean are exactly where something died. No other creature on Earth leaves behind an aftermath this large, this enduring, or this transformative. A single whale long gone from the living world becomes food, shelter, energy, and finally structure-shaping communities that will never even know what creature gave them life. In the end, every whale fall is a reminder of how deeply life is connected to death in the ocean. A creature so massive that nothing could challenge it in life becomes in death the foundation for thousands of smaller ones. Its energy echoes through decades. Its bones become shelter. Its atoms drift outward until they dissolve into the sea itself. Whether you see it as beautiful, disturbing, or both, No other animal shapes the deep ocean the way a dead whale does. Its fall is not an ending, but a beginning, repeated again and again across the abyss. Thank you for watching, and thank you for helping the channel reach 30,000 subscribers. I'm working hard to create the stories you want to see, so if you have more ideas, feel free to leave them below. And if you want to explore how the two largest squids on Earth evolved, that video is waiting for you.